Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Men Are Talking. Today, we're going to talk with Jeff Huntington. I want to start with a few shout outs first, though. The first shout out is going to be to Jeff Huntington. That's the big shout out because Jeff Huntington deserves a lot of credit for telling the story that he is going to tell us today and that he has told in other venues before. So, shout out to Jeff Huntington. Also, a shout out to Blair Daly, who is the person who first turned me on to Jeff Huntington's story. Blair is the director of Equality for Boys and Men, and in his March 17th, 2022 blog post, he posted Jeff's story that we're going to talk about today. Also, Blair is the one who found this picture that you see over my left shoulder. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening by Apple Podcast, maybe you can go to Male Friendly Media on YouTube, search for Male Friendly Media on YouTube, and then you'll find our channel. You can look at this picture. I think it's perfect for the subject we're talking about today. Shout outs about that picture taken by Yuri Bogdanov and made available on the internet at no charge by Unsplash. Okay, I think that's it for the shout outs. So, Jeff, you have a great story to tell. And why don't you take 5, 10, maybe 12 minutes to tell the story? I might interrupt from time to time for clarification, but otherwise, the floor is yours to tell this story.
Okay. And thanks for having me, Jack. I know this has been a long time coming. I think it's an important story to get out there because stories like this one and like mine are becoming a lot more common in today's world. But yeah, I guess the easiest way to explain what happened is to go back about a year ago. It was the summer of 2021, and I was leading an expedition. It was a month-long expedition in the mountains for an experiential learning school, outdoor leadership school. And we were approximately 3 days into a 30-day course when an allegation of sexual misconduct was raised against a male student. And naturally, as the lead instructor, I was very concerned and more or less followed protocol. I've dealt with situations like this in the past, and they're never easy to deal with, but I generally approach them. We have a toolkit as instructors to approach them, and essentially, it's an investigative process that seeks to leave no stone unturned and get to the truth of what happened so that we can address moving forward as a group. And so as soon as I learned about these allegations, I conferenced with my co-instructor, and we went down that investigative process by interviewing the students involved and anyone who we thought might have any information to share. And what we reached was a pretty good understanding of the facts, because it wasn't necessarily a he said, she said type of situation. All the students on all sides more or less agreed on what had happened. And the facts of the case were we were in a backcountry camp in North Cascades National Park, and these backpacking camps are sort of spread out, so there's lots of little flat tent sites sort of scattered throughout the forest. And we were a large group, and so we had multiple tents, and we were all spread out, and students were in single gender tent groups. And so there was a tent inhabited by female students approximately 50 feet away from a tent site inhabited by male students. And one of the female students had been changing her clothes outside of the tent. And another female student noticed one of the male students from about 50 feet away essentially look up in their direction. And that was in that student's eyes tantamount to harassment and sexual misconduct. And she felt she felt violated by that. And again, at first when I heard this, I thought, well, okay, maybe there was something to the idea that he was spying on the female student, or being sort of a kind of creepy peeping Tom kind of guy. And so we really made sure that that wasn't the case. And after speaking with the male student, it turns out there was no intent. He was more or less on task, packing his pack and getting ready for the day. And he just looked up, and, you know, it wasn't his prerogative as to what he was going to see or not see. He was in his camp, on task, doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he looked up, and there was someone that just happened to be changing her clothes outside of her tent about 50 feet away. And so with those facts realized, we began to move forward as a group, and I addressed the issue on all sides, but part of our protocol is to notify our higher ups via satellite phone if we're investigating any sort of sexual misconduct or allegation. And as soon as we shared those facts with our branch, our main office, the due process just sort of went out the window, and the male student was automatically assumed to be guilty of something, and the female student was automatically assumed to be the victim of some sort of egregious act. And that's the way the administration reacted to it, and it became this inescapable sort of Kafka trap for this male student, because while he didn't really do anything wrong, if he protested and said he didn't do anything wrong, it implicated him more. And if he agreed to what they were alleging against him, it basically incriminated him even more. So he was ultimately expelled on I believe it was day 7 or day 8 of a 30-day course, sent home. The female student who was undressing, and then the other female student who saw the male student look in their direction, left the course out of their own choice. And one of the really interesting aspects of this is, directly following the incident, the female student who had been undressing more or less was very stoic. She thought that it was probably just a misunderstanding. She wanted to give the male student the benefit of the doubt. She I think realized that it was probably just a misunderstanding and wanted to move on. The other female student was very interested in going home. She had already spoken to that for the previous 2 days and was not enjoying herself. But over the following 3 days after that incident, the female students were basically groomed into being victims. And the more that my administrative office moved towards punishing this male student and protecting the female students and treating them like victims, the more they began to act like victims, up until the point of the male student's expulsion when the female students were more or less acting the part of rape victims. They were very, very emotionally distraught, very, yeah, just at one point, one of them remarked, I feel like a shell of a person, you know? And so it went from this like very stoic kind of mature response to this cultivated victim identity that almost seemed like a acted role, you know, by the time it came time to make decisions about who was going to stay on the course and who was going to leave the course. So it was all very interesting to watch it unfold over a period of, 3 to 5 days.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything more you want to add to initially laying out the story? Because that raises some questions for me.
No, I don't think so at this moment. Yeah, feel free to.
Okay. You mentioned that it was Kafkaesque for the young supposed perpetrator.
Yes.
And in your blog post, you referred to him by the pseudonym of Tyler.
Yes.
Right. So you mentioned that this was all Kafkaesque for Tyler. It was also Kafkaesque for you in a way, wasn't it? In that, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the Kafka trap I found myself in wasn't until I sort of broached this subject with the executive leadership of the school and the administration. They they gave me opportunities to share why I felt the way I did. And then they sort of responded by trying to throw me under the bus and say, well, actually, you created this culture of non-support for the female students, and you weren't responsive enough, and you minimized their concerns. And I don't think that was the case at all. I reject that wholeheartedly. I think it was just this ideology which has seeped into so many institutions and taken over so many institutions, which is that you're either an oppressor or a victim depending on your identity, and you cannot escape that. It's something you're born into. So as a male, you are automatically an oppressor. As a white person, you are automatically an oppressor. If you are heterosexual, you're automatically an oppressor. And if you're the opposite of any one of those things, you are the oppressed. And so rather than take each situation based on the facts involved in it, they're simply looking at the situations based on the identities of the people involved, and then they're using that to inform their decision making moving forward. And so yeah, I definitely felt like I was in a Kafka trap, because it was one of those things where if you try to defend the male student, you're seen as a victim blamer. If you point out the fact that we were on public land and the female student had an option of changing in her tent for full privacy, but she made the decision to be bare-chested, well aware that there were male students and possibly other stranger public land users around, that is somehow being insensitive to her feeling of victimhood. So yeah, I would say that Kafkaesque is almost an understatement.
You mentioned that the women, I think there were 5 women, 5 men on this 30-day excursion.
Yes.
You mentioned that After this all went down and it was decided that Tyler was a perpetrator, that the women started acting as if they were sort of playing a role, or they were involved in a role. Was the role they were all acting out together the role of women as a collective being the oppressed?
Again, I think it stemmed from this cultivated mentality. And when I say cultivated, it's because we were given strict orders while we were still in the field to do such things as check in multiple times a day with only the female students and ask them if they were feeling emotionally safe. And by doing that, it begins to make them question whether they feel emotionally safe. I mean, that's literally what we're doing. And so I understand the response to a degree that we want students to feel emotionally safe. But there's a difference between perceived and actual threats. And this is something that I've found in my experience as an outdoor leader many times before, is whether it's heights, or like a fear of heights or a fear of bears, these students come into this situation not necessarily knowing what the actual threats are. And if you either downplay them too much or accentuate them too much, you can really cause a lot of emotional distress. And so I did not see Tyler as a threat following this incident, but because we were putting so much focus on the female students and asking, do you feel safe? Do you feel emotionally safe? Are you comfortable around him? On and on. It led to the situation where, one of the female students involved had us physically move our tent between hers and the male tent. And she said that she was afraid to go to the bathroom and that he would be hiding in the bushes spying on her. So there were all these like very sort of imagined threats that were not real. And I'm sure part of that was also cultivated by the response that we ultimately took, which was to put Tyler on a disciplinary contract. So again, it was this, we're moving towards like, the title of the article says it great, protect her, punish him. And so it by going down that path and ignoring the due process for Tyler, it created this sense of legitimacy to the claims of this one female student who wanted to go home anyway. And it created this heightened level of anxiety and tension within the group that didn't need to be there if we had just been able to sit down as a group and speak truth about what had happened.
So there was a lot of attention paid at the direction of your superiors to the emotional safety and the feelings of the women. There was, if I understand your description, both verbal just now and written, there was no attention paid by your supervisors to the emotional well-being or safety of Tyler. And that is why I've got this picture of somebody who in my mind represents Tyler over my left shoulder here. You learned from talking to Tyler that he was significantly distressed emotionally at what was going on. Can you talk a bit about that?
Definitely. Yeah, I think as anyone would be, who is accused of something that they don't feel they did, either with intent or even unintentionally. I think there's a lot of distress that comes with that. And he did break down, we had several check-ins, and I felt that throughout most of the response to this incident, I was probably the only person in Tyler's corner. And I told him that specifically on several occasions, that I didn't think he was a sexual predator or a deviant, and that I was in his corner, and that I was just basically waiting until we had better communication with the administration to share his side of the story and sort of come to his defense. And that's why I was caught so off guard when they made the decision to expel him, because I didn't feel it was warranted at all. But yeah, definitely throughout this process, he broke down several times and told me that he was freaking out and was very upset that these allegations had been leveled against him. And if I could go back in time, I would probably take a stronger stand in the field. Because at one point when we were putting him on the disciplinary contract, which that was also sort of a mandate handed down from the office, his response to it was, well, I could tell he was very frustrated, but his response to this contract was, I don't think I should be put on this contract. And my co-instructor asked why, and he said, because I didn't do anything. And my co-instructor kind of fired back, yes, you did. And it became this thing like that was sort of the laying of the Kafka trap. It was, if he agreed, then he's implicating himself. And at one point he did sort of fold a little bit and parrot some of these ideas inherent in this ideology, which it was hard to watch, but he did become complicit in his own incrimination by saying, yeah, I guess this is just the price I pay for being a guy. And, damn men, referring to the men who had come before him, who had been in some way been in some way terrible to a woman. And later on, the executive leadership admitted that potentially one of the reasons they reacted the way they did is because perhaps in the past they have underreacted to instances of sexual abuse or harassment, and so that in this case they overreacted. And so you get this strange pendulum swinging where it's like, okay, if we underreacted in the past, we're going to overreact this time to make sure we get it right. But they absolutely got it wrong.
Would you talk a little bit about how Tyler confided in you that he was a very avid video gamer and that this experience was transformative for him, this experience of being in the outdoors?
Definitely. Yeah, so I think all students, when they join a course like this, they aren't really sure what to expect. And many of them have never been camping before. They're often from major urban centers across the US and around the world. And Tyler was no different. He was from the Bay Area. And part of this program is a mentor-mentee check-in relationship. And so we have ongoing check-ins with our students who have chosen us as mentors. And so you begin to learn some very personal details about the students and where they're coming from in life. And during one of these check-ins, Tyler confided in me that he was a recovering video game addict. I think he had actually completed a treatment program for it. So he even referred to it as using versus just gaming. It was like, he was a user of this technology for a dopamine hit. And possibly also escapism, escaping the reality of the pressures of being a teenager, pressures of living through COVID, through all sorts of difficult circumstances. I know that I don't know to what extent this was a factor, but I do know that there was some question about the stability of his relationship with his father. So he was not unlike many students in coming into this program, that he was dealing with some really difficult things at home. And he, at one point, when there was the question placed in his mind about whether he would be expelled, he sort of broke down and told me how much he was really benefiting from being there. And he could tell just in the 5 days he had been there that he was changing. He was really benefiting from being out there, from the physical exertion and the mental challenges and the learnings, the small everyday learnings that you gain from being out there. And so that made it even the more heartbreaking to see him forcibly removed against his will. Just a sense that he was probably getting so much more out of it than the female student who wanted to go home after day 2,
So you, and I think you referred to your co-leader as Billy.
Yes.
Is that a pseudonym as well?
Yes.
Okay. So you and Billy were the leaders of this month-long expedition course. And after the allegations were made against Tyler and you followed protocol and reported it, 3 other people from your organization got themselves involved. Can you describe who they were? I don't need names, but who they were in the hierarchy, what their experience is in leading expeditions like this, whether they were in positions of authority because they really deserved to be in positions of authority for an expedition like this, or were they perhaps just the politically correct choices. And I also am interested to know, or to note, that all 3 of them are female. And I have to ask, were there any males at the office who were available to intervene into this situation in the interest of diversity and inclusion, to have some male, in addition to you, some male perspective on what Tyler was going through? A lot of questions there. Talk to me about the 3 women and the organization that hired them.
Yeah. So while I was in the field still, before the decision was made to expel Tyler, I had been informed by the branch director, who is a female, that there would be 2 other managers. There would be 2 managers arriving at our resupply at the roadhead to help with the decision making and the processing of what had happened. So this event happened, and then we were in the field for 3 or 4 more days before we met these managers at a pre-scheduled break in the course to receive re-rations and refuel and all that. On the day that we met them at the trailhead, again, I've dealt with situations like this in the past, and so I was really expecting a very long process of interviewing and discussions, and I knew that they would want to talk to me about what had happened, being the course leader, and have me weigh in on it, and they would perhaps involve people at higher levels of administration as well, as much as possible. And so when they arrived at the trailhead, and I'll use the pseudonyms for them that I used in the article. I believe it was Kelsey and Ashley are the names that I used. Ashley is what is she? I forget her title, but it's something like, I think at the time she was, at the time she was our program supervisor.
Yes, that's the term you used. Yes.
Yeah, she also holds another position within the organization that it's like a diversity coordinator slash, she heads a department that basically screens the new hires for their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I could tell that I knew right away that was going to play a hand in this. The other woman who accompanied her was Kelsey, and she was the assistant director of the branch. So two sort of higher ranking managers within the school. And then they also involved another woman who I believe I used the pseudonym Sadie for, and she was not present. She was brought in by satellite phone and weighed in on the incident while we were discussing it at the roadhead. To answer your question about male managers, there were no other male managers available. I'm trying to think if there even would be a male manager who could have weighed in, and I don't think there is. I think there might be one middle manager at the branch who is male, but he wouldn't have been in a position to weigh in on this. And I did think it was interesting. Again, it kind of goes along with this ideology that because I was a male instructor and my co-instructor was a male instructor, that we didn't really have anything to offer in terms of shedding light on what had happened. And I thought it was very strange that as soon as we met these two female managers at the roadhead, I thought the first thing that would happen is that they would want to talk to me about what happened. And instead, their first decision was to tell me that they didn't want to talk to me and that they were going to interview the female students. And it wasn't until the very end, when they had basically already made their decision, that they asked me to weigh in with what I had to offer. And what I had to offer was basically verbatim accounts. I transcribed the student stories word for word on the back of a manila envelope. And so I had everybody's line of questioning when I had asked them what had happened. I tried to be really objective and ask open-ended questions and get them to really describe what happened. And I asked clarifying questions and took it all down in longhand, exactly what they said. And having all those accounts written out and organized for my managers, I thought that would have been plenty to clear Tyler's name and show that really nothing extraordinary had happened with this incident, and that there was no intent on his behalf to cause harm. But the female managers would not even entertain. They didn't even want to look at the firsthand accounts I had transcribed the day that this had happened. Instead, they went off of the emotional state of the female quote unquote victims in that moment. And like I said earlier, their emotional state was sort of at its apex of evolution from the previous 3 to 4 days. So they were very upset. They were, quote unquote, shells of people. And this one manager approached me and said, I don't see any possible way that, given their emotional state, that Tyler, whether intentional or unintentional, can stay on the course because he caused so much harm. And I was just gobsmacked. Like, you're not going to take any of the facts into account here. You're just going to go off of the emotional posturing of someone that didn't really have anything happen to them.
How would you rate the qualifications of these 3 women to be your supervisor?
I don't know that I'm in a place to. I think Knowles is an institution that relies very heavily on young employees. And so I believe that both of them were younger than me. There's a lot of turnover in this institution because it's not, historically, it has not been a very high paying job. It's the kind of job that people seek out for the experience, which is why I did initially. You're getting paid to spend extended periods of time in really beautiful backcountry wild areas. You're getting the opportunity to create these little intentional communities and talk about, fun stuff like mycology and ecology and biology and geology, all the ologies. And, you're getting to bake pizza in the backcountry and do all this fun stuff. And so I think that people get involved with the organization for a lot of different reasons. And I don't know. Again, I don't think I'm in a place to criticize whether or not they were qualified. But what I have noticed is that there are an increasing number of people within the organization who are proponents of this ideology I was speaking about, which is this oppressor/victim ideology. And it's a very hard ideology to resist. It's based in Marxism, and we all know how that plays out. It's a very similar Kafka trap. If you resist it, well, then you're with the oppressors and you need to be dealt with. If you accept it, then you watch people get unfairly maligned. So I think that ideology has really taken hold of the institution, and unfortunately, the executive leadership has not done what they should do as executive leaders and, defend truth.
There was a lot of attention paid to the emotional state of the 5 women on the trip. We know the term victim-centered investigations. The conclusion was reached very quickly that I think her name is Melissa,
Yes.
is a pseudonym, was the victim. No consideration whatsoever to the possibility that the real victim here might have been Tyler. Before Tyler was terminated and sent home, did any of the other 5 young men on the trip, did they have any inkling that something was up with Tyler?
So, do you mean like, did they suspect anything, or were they coming to his defense?
Did they know that he was in jeopardy, that he was under discipline for some reason that they could not understand or did not know about? And I'm wondering if the young men felt any emotional lack of safety that was not attended to at all by the organization.
Yeah, so there was another male student who was sharing Tyler's tent with him present during the incident, but unfortunately he had gone into his tent right as the incident began to play out, so he did not really witness any of the actual events and couldn't really add a whole lot there. And because we were a small group in the backcountry, it's very difficult to shelter the rest of the group from what is going on. We did ask the allegers and Tyler not to talk about it within the group. And we sort of opened the door for anyone else who is having concerns about what was going on to come to us as instructors for reassurance. I do think that it's kind of like in a family that's going through a divorce. When the parents are speaking about it in hushed tones behind closed doors, the kids might not know all the details of what's going on, but they know something's going on and they know it's serious. And so it definitely raises the level of anxiety within the group. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I was chastised at some point by the branch director for giving too much support to Tyler, even though that's in our protocol. We have all kinds of forms and documents that there's sort of like flow charts that say, provide support for the victim and the aggressor. And so I'm trying to remember the specific incident. I can't remember. I think maybe I was seen as giving more support in the moment to Tyler than I was the female students. But again, I think that I was giving him support and I was the only one giving him support. And so, and I was also really trying to withhold judgment. I think that the fact that I did not immediately move into this punitive sort of directive stance against Tyler was seen as not in some way supporting the female students, because by supporting the female students, I think what they meant by that is you should have taken a very, hard-fisted punitive approach and, believed that they were feeling emotionally unsafe and therefore done what I could to protect them, which would have meant punishing this male student. And I was more or less trying to reserve judgment until I could talk about it with my superiors and present to them the evidence that I had gathered. And like I said, I had well, it was a very dissimilar case, but it was another case of sexual misconduct. Not that this case was involving sexual misconduct, because nothing happened, but the previous course that I worked and dealt with this, it was a very clear case of sexual misconduct. A male student had slapped a female student on the butt, and when she asked him, "Why did you do that?" he said, "Because it's there." I think we can both agree that that's really inappropriate behavior to take place on a co-ed wilderness trip. And we shared that with him. But even in that case where it was very clear that he had misstepped, the administration took a very long time with the investigative process and the discussions to make sure that they hadn't missed anything, and that that they were protecting the interests of everyone involved. And that student ultimately left, which was a decision that I agreed with. He was expelled. And I think that's why I had so much more faith in the system in this case initially, that, given the chance to present a clear defense for Tyler and, show the evidence I had gathered, that he would be exonerated and allowed to continue the course. Instead, he was expelled, and the one female manager, Ashley, ended up staying with us she joined the course for 3 days to sort of babysit my co-instructor and I, and make sure that this course culture was somehow redeemable. And because they immediately implicated the course culture. They said that we had not done our jobs as instructors to create a safe and inclusive course culture, and that's what led to this horrible incident.
Did you mention also in your write-up, I think you did, that one of the three supervisors expressed a sort of joy or satisfaction at the expulsion of Tyler?
They both, it was strange when we arrived at the trailhead to meet them. I think that it was pretty clear that our group was suffering as a whole, because, kind of back to that example of, kids going through a parental divorce or a family breakup. It was clear that something was going on and that it was serious. And so I knew that I was personally pretty emotionally drained, and, from dealing with this for 5 days. And it, not to mention, it just increases the workload by a huge amount. And instead of talking about geology and meteorology and all the fun stuff, all we're doing is having meetings about, whether you feel emotionally safe, and, big cry sessions and group hugs, and, people coming to you and saying that they don't feel comfortable in the group, or that they want to leave, or, all this stuff. And so it's a lot to deal with. And I think when I arrived at the trailhead, I expected a similar amount of seriousness and reverence for what was going on. And my first I would say that my sort of initial feeling with how the other female managers were approaching this was they were kind of giddy. They were almost on a high. And it seemed, yeah, it was strange. It seemed like they they were getting some satisfaction out of getting to put into action their ideology and, you know, feel or act out this emotional support for these female quote unquote victims and punish this male student. It didn't seem like they were in any way concerned about his feelings or his emotions in this. And in fact, later, well, the next day after Tyler got expelled, this manager who joined our expedition sat down and addressed the remaining students to tell them what had happened. And she blatantly lied about it in order to justify it. She said that she told them that he approached the female victim and against her wishes, and basically embellished and added things to the story which were completely false. And I was just aghast. I could not believe that she would do that. And but it made the story much more believable / legitimize their course of action. And so, yeah, I don't think there was.
It made it righteous.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. They were reaching in order to validate their response.
Yeah. So we have some indication that there are problems with NOLS, NOLS, the organization that runs these courses. Some indication that there were problems at the staff level. I think it was Blair Daly who suggested, maybe it was you, I think it was Blair who suggested that I ought to ask you about the board of directors, the trustees, the benefactors. What's going on in regards to this incident at the higher level above the staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd love to know. All I can really shed light on there is when I sort of broke this story to the upper levels of management. They told me that they were initiating an investigation. The investigation was led by one of the female managers who ultimately made the decision to expel Tyler. So it was a very sort of kangaroo court. I know that there was at least one other course around the same time as mine that had a very similar incident on it, and that got. I think there might be some legal action happening with that one. I know that they know it's a problem, but I think many in the executive leadership feel powerless to do anything about it. I definitely broke this story wide open to the greater Knowles community and the board of trustees because I wanted them to know why I was leaving. I know that at least one major benefactor to the school has withdrawn all financial support for the school. They actually had a scholarship named after him, which was given to the top performing new instructor. And so there was an award named after him. And when he learned about these incidents, he withdrew all his financial support. And so I definitely know that there are people at the upper levels who are not happy with this sort of response and this pattern, which is becoming apparent at the school. But again, this ideology, Knowles is not alone. This is, I think, in every college or most colleges and universities, and now in corporate America and all over the place, as I'm sure you're well aware. It's a very hard ideology to fight, and I keep coming back to something that was told me by someone close to me, which is, the only thing that we can really do to fight this is to tell the truth. And so that's what I aimed to do with my article and all the correspondence I've had with the executive leadership and this podcast. And
So
just get it out there. Yeah.
Two more questions then, Jeff. Have you paid a price for telling the truth? You are essentially a whistleblower. And the fate of whistleblowers, especially if they don't have the benefit of the Whistleblower Protection Act, can be very rough. What price have you paid for having integrity about this situation?
Yeah, I think I've definitely paid a price. Going into this course, I did not think it would be my last course. So I basically ended my career and my relationship with Knowles over it. They, during the investigation, they basically offered me a demotion, and said, we'd like for you to work a course. So the way it works is you work up through a hierarchy, and you start as an instructor, and then you become a patrol leader, which is sort of second in command. And then after enough experience, you attain the level of course leader, which is the capacity I was working in on this specific expedition. And so they told me that if I wanted to keep working for the school after this, and after basically being a whistleblower, that I would have to work at least one course as a patrol leader, which amounts to a reduction in pay and a reduction in responsibility and a reduction in status. And that I would also have to entertain one-on-one feedback from the female students who were alleging that I was not emotionally supportive enough for them in the moment. And I refused because I already did that. The 3 days following this incident, I basically entertained feedback from the female students, and went through my own sort of Kafka trap. Not only have I ended my relationship with Knowles, but Knowles is a huge community of outdoor enthusiasts, and it's sort of a network of past and present instructors and students and staff. And so it's a very large community with ties all over the globe. And I gave up a lot of that because as soon as I brought this out, I think a lot of people at the school immediately, just assumed the worst about me, or assumed that I was in some way a misogynist, or didn't believe the stories of the female students, or took a perspective on the situation that attempted to minimize it. And I don't think any of those things are true. But people will believe what they believe. And so yeah, I definitely have paid in that way. Like I said, initially this is sort of like a dream job that a lot of people strive to get. There are a lot of benefits to working in that capacity, but I just couldn't in good conscience go forward with an institution that was going to take that position on that incident, given what we knew about it.
And then the last question might be the most important question, at least in one way of viewing this very complex and unfortunate situation. What was your last contact with Tyler, and how is he doing?
Yeah, so I've been in contact with Tyler sporadically through email following this course. When I knew that it was inevitable that he was going home, I gave him my contact info and some other resources online of people he could check out that are sort of fighting for sort of equality and men's rights and things like that. I heard he's it's a little hard to pin him down through email, so I'll write him an email and then I might hear back a couple months later. I know that at one point I think they were pursuing legal action. I think Knowles had specifically told him and or his family that he wasn't to discuss any of this with me, but I had made a standing offer to him that if it came to a legal situation, that I was more than happy to testify on his behalf. And I think the last thing I heard from him, I got a short email that said he did eventually get a refund, because that was the other thing. Knowles has a policy that once the course starts, there's no refunds for whatever reason. So they expelled him for sexual misconduct, but then right before they sort of severed the tie and kicked him off the property, they removed that language, sexual misconduct, from the paperwork because it would make him eligible for another course. And so they basically said, we're expelling you right now. We're going to remove this language, and that way you can take another course if you want to. Not that he would ever want to. But he left. He was, he had to pay for a hotel room that night and change his plane tickets to go home, pay for all that out of pocket. And he was 22 days early for leaving the course, and then on top of that, they said, no, we're not going to give you a refund, and you'll forever be looked upon by your former peers on this course as a sexual deviant and a sexual predator based on what the manager told them about the situation. And so I more or less spent the last year of my life advocating on Tyler's behalf to the Knowles executive leadership. Most of my reaching out to them went unanswered. And I don't know if Tyler and his family had to pursue legal action in order to get a refund, but the last I've heard, he did eventually receive a refund.
So I understand from what you're saying that most of your contact, maybe all of your contact since he was expelled, has been by email. Do you have any understanding of what his emotional state is? Did he express gratitude to you? Did he say that your support was important to him? Any such thing?
Definitely. Yeah. He in that last email where he talked about receiving the refund, he did thank me for my support. I think like any teenager, he's probably just busy. But right when I learned he was getting expelled, I told him in the note that I wrote him, just not to let this be the defining incident or the defining moment of his life, and that I understood how much he was benefiting from being out in the wilderness, but Knowles does not create or control the gateway to the wilderness, and that was still going to be there for him. And so I did throw out the offer. He hasn't taken me up on it, but I did throw it out there that, I know the North Cascades very well. And in the future, if he wanted me ever to take him somewhere cool and, show him a cool backpacking trip or something, I would be more than happy to do that. And I felt like I owed that to him a little bit, because I was in a very difficult situation in dealing with that incident. But again, like I said, if I could go back in time, I would probably take a much more forceful position against the ideology that was being sort of forced on me in the situation.
Very good. Jeff Huntington, thank you so much for your time and for your integrity, your courage, your caring for a class of people who don't seem to get much caring these days. And also thank you to our listeners. Thank you for listening to Men Are Talking. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Men Are Talking. Did we deliver? Did you hear something that made you think, wow, I never thought of it like that? If we did, tell your friends.